Hello. Welcome back to another episode of This Old House. Today we're going to be remodeling a kitchen. So we're doing session setup today. We have to, this is actually handy for me because I have to set up for a session. So we have singer-songwriter. What was really heartbreaking, and we just realized right before we hit record, was the girl whose session this is provided a reference list of what she proclaimed was classic rock. I thought this was very modern, so I'm so old that everything I listen to is classic rock now. Awful. So we're going to be talking about, what are we going to talk about? Mic choices, how I'm going to be listening to references, the thought process behind like picking things to build a session like this, what all needs to go out here for a bunch of players and an artist to do this all at the same time. What am I missing? Setting up the DAW, line checks. This might be a long one.
Yeah.
A lot of thought process stuff here. So join us in this episode of This Old House. So I typically always start with drums, but I'm going to make myself a new... Should I screen cap this? Would that be helpful?
Sure. Doesn't hurt.
Like if you can see my notes. So I'm just really quickly going to note this out. I know I want 3 mics on kick just because I love the way these 3 things work, and I'll say why here in a second. Snare top, snare bottom. Wow, there's going to be evidence of my awful typing.
I'll cut it all out. Just jump cut to all the completed words.
Oh, I'm going to caps lock this so it doesn't correct me at every turn. Tom 1, Tom 2, overhead left, overhead right. I have like basically my fixed position ribbon mics that are always out here. So room ribbon, room far. So I'm just kind of building out a very simple chart that I know is going to change. But I also know that I might want stereo lines for bass.
Yeah.
Because we're doing some stuff. Some of the references have like chorusy bass. I think it'd be really cool to print that. So, I mean, even if it's stereo chorus effects or if it's even mono chorus and I keep one completely dry, we'll see. But I'm going to do bass DI1, bass DI2. Then I know we're going to have keys. So there's MIDI keys. That's easy. Because singer-songwriter stuff, I don't know exactly what I'm getting into. So having the MIDI here, we can kind of do whatever we need really quick. Oh, I know he's going to be bringing his organ. So organ left, organ right. I'm going to need an acoustic line. I'm going to need guitar cab 1, guitar cab 2. What else am I going to want? That might be it. So we have our general layout as far general layout of what this is going to look like. And now I'll listen to some of these songs, and this may have to get blopped out, but we can kind of put on screen what we're listening to, maybe, so that we don't get flaggy pooed. By the way, like and subscribe, because who knows, this might be demonetized. Stevie Nicks' Room on Fire is at the top of the reference list. So when I'm listening to a reference, I know so much of this is about emotion with the artist, so I'm not taking too much of it literally, but I'm trying to pick apart, like, what are the things that a layman or like my kids could talk about to this. So I'm listening to like very general drum tones, very general what's happening in the bass. Is Is it stereo? Is it mono? Are there effects? Obviously, we have like electronic keys here. Very little happening guitar, at least right now. And then keeping in mind, that's just one thing in the reference list. So I'm going to kind of float around here. I know Heart, Magic Man pretty well. That leads me to like want to grab certain mics, but there's a whole list of songs here. So I kind of have to take into account a lot of these different things. And so Hosier is another reference here. Kind of that lo-fi, almost claustrophobic thing. Kind of goes in with the vintage vibe. Another Hosier record, Take Me to Church. So again, I'm going to probably say that's a very emotional thing. Like that's a space thing. And I can say that because the demos that I got from her aren't necessarily in this vein. So this could be something that's like nostalgic or emotionally driven from this perspective, and that's one thing to keep in mind when you're doing this. You're talking references with your artist. How much of this is sonic? How much of it is, for lack of a better term, a vibe that they want to go for? And it's, you have to know, like, okay, are we going hard into this lane, or is this something we're just going to keep in the back of our heads? Because even doing that and telling a bunch of session players, hey, keep this song in the back of your head, like, I mean, you guys do that really well. Josh holding the camera, who's shaking his head, but you couldn't see. But that goes a long way, even to tell people, like, okay, here's the general sound we have. I say general a lot. Now that you're, every time off camera, he's going like this. So the overall sound that we have is like this picture here. But this one reference outlier possibly is something that we can kind of keep in the back of our head and inform some certain artistic decisions. Danny California. I can't quite figure out where this one comes in.
It's another classic.
It's a classic rock. And then there's the struts. See, like, that's a very different sound right there. So, but there's the most struts on this reference list. So what I kind of think is happening here is she likes Stevie Nicks. She really likes Heart, but those aspects bringing them into kind of a modern thing. And so how do we do that? I've got some ideas. I don't know why I did an accent. Well, let's go. So the drums are basically torn apart right now from the previous session, but I think mic choice is going to be almost spot on for this. Inside kick drum is a 91, Beta 91. So this guy, on its own, it's gnarly. I don't like it. But it's this combination of mics, like these three specifically, I can get darn near any sound I want. And when I was saying why I'm using three, and I'll get back to that, is we're getting back to that now, if that wasn't clear. I said that really weird. Here's me getting back to it. So the singer-songwriter stuff, like, I was going to say general again. Dang it. I have an idea of where we're going.
What kind of idea?
A general idea.
Like a very specific one? Or
We're forming a military. This is what we're doing. So
is it a major idea?
Lieutenant idea.
Corporal.
Private idea.
Ooh.
I have an idea of where we're going with this, but with a singer-songwriter, especially somebody who doesn't have a ton of studio experience, this thing could change on a dime. She could hear something one of the session players is doing, and it could inform the session from then on. Like, you've seen it happen, like where we have an idea and then it takes a complete left turn. So there's a certain aspect of this I want to be ready for whatever. So there's going to be a fair bit of like, well, why are you doing that when you could have just done this? That's the whole thing. It's being versatile and being able to fix this. Could I fix this with samples? Yeah, but I don't want to. I want to make, I want to do it at the source. But this combination of the 91, the Bayer, what is this? The M88, I think. Yeah, the M88. As like a half in, half out thing. And then the Jay-Z Vintage 11 which I don't really like the 47 thing on kick drums, like the Neumann U47. There's a ton of clones of that thing. It's definitely a sound. I don't really like it, and that's a very personal choice. This feels really good as a kick out. And the combination of these three plays so well together to the point where, like, forming a kick sound for me is adjusting faders. Like, if I pull the M88 completely out of it, now we have like a very boomy kind of classic thing. The more of this I put in, the more modern the kick drum sounds. So, and being a 24 by 14, it can be fairly versatile. It's never going to sound small, but the more I dampen it, I can kind of create that thing. So right now I've got the pillow inside. I always dampen it, not crazy heavy, but I'm definitely trying to like shorten the resonance because full maple shell 24 by 14, it's a big drum. The fundamental typically sits like 55 to 65. I think right now it's sitting at like 58, which is a good spot for me.
Did you guys hear how he said pillow?
What did I do? Pillow?
Pillow.
Then what do you say?
Pillow.
Pillow. What am I doing wrong? I've had so many people say this to me. My wife makes fun of me and I can't hear it. Pillow. What am I doing?
You're saying L instead of ill.
Pillow.
Like you're sick, ill. Or
Ill.
you have to take a
Ill.
pill.
I'm taking a pillow. It feels wrong. Pillow. Now I'm so sorry. I don't want to talk anymore. So this is my cool triad orbit stand where I can have my top and bottom mic. I mean, there's going to be a lot of Loudon stuff here. Not because, I mean, I've done videos on all these, I think. I haven't done videos on the tom mics, actually. Definitely did a video on snare mic. It's fantastic. I mean, you kind of can do the 57 thing. You can do the condenser thing. It's just big. But with that, you can also kind of pare this thing down and make it small with the different switches you have on here. Like I can high pass and low pass this however I want. Most often I'm keeping it wide open, and anything I need to do, I do in the box. The 421, I really don't like them. I really don't like 421s. But I find they're okay on snare bottom. Yeah, I can use anything on snare bottom. It happens to be what's left over, so they're cool on bass cabs. I don't like them on toms. I know somebody's going to say, well, you're doing like older rock style, just put 421s on toms. Yes, but the bleed from them sounds like garbage. So I can get that like thuddy dark attack from these guys. The Loudon tom mic. Or even the 308. Like, and these are laying here because the last session brought his own kit and we just kind of took them off so they could tear down. But both of these, tom mic is kind of an iteration after the 308. Super laser focused, very little bleed, but you still get kind of this focused, almost like classic-ish tom sound. It's like what everybody wants the 421 to do, but if you don't want the nasty bleed from it, then that's a good way to go about it. Overheads, I might change this, but I like the 013 tubes just because they're so open. Like the top end is definitely flexible on these. I'm thinking about switching them to like a Mojave, the MA301s. That would be leaning more towards a vibe for sure. The only reason I think, well, I might keep these because I can gnarly these up if I want to. If one of her tracks tilts a little differently, these are a little more versatile. For like big rock stuff, like Tool, Deftones-y stuff like a band I had in, I set up those 301s and they're great. They lean hard into one direction and it was done. That was the finished sound. In instances like this, where I don't know exactly what I'm getting into, I kind of have to lean towards the more versatile stuff. So I think I'm going to keep these up. This guy, I did not expect to be my hi-hat choice. My absolute favorite hi-hat mic is the Gefell UM70, which is absurdly expensive as a hi-hat mic, and I don't know why it works so well. But this kind of does that thing too, the Chandler TG Type L. I keep it on like the darker setting, the B setting, and just right over a hi-hat. It's perfect. Sounds so good. That's the hardest thing. Hi-hat's like hard to find a good mic for, but I like that one. This was a mid-side setup for the last session. We're not going to be able to do that for this. So that is either going to get torn down or moved to something else. Acoustic, Soyuz 017. It sounds magical on an acoustic, so I'm going to keep that up. If we want something kind of more vintagey, I might pull out the 441. That would be leaning really into a vibe. But for right now, I'm going to keep that up. Or actually, the M160 might be the move. Little buyer, the M160. This thing's really cool on acoustics and on hi-hat, actually. So, but I wouldn't move the TG to acoustic. I might use this on acoustic. I might change that out. I don't think this is on the right mount. That doesn't feel good. I don't like that. It says buyer, though.
Do you know her?
Hardly. So a lot of those drum tones on the references, like, they sound like I can hear a 421 on like the Stevie Nicks stuff. Like, was it a 421? It may not have been, but it'll do that thing, or at least get close. Very well could have been a 421. It very well could have been like a condenser through a really pushed preamp on a board. I don't know, but it'll get close to that sound, like that dark thuddy thing. I can reproduce that. I'm more thinking like, okay, that's the target, but there's also all these other references like Danny California. That's a very different drum sound, but I think that's in there because of the drum sound. If that makes any sense. Like this is one of those things I could get it very, very wrong. And sometimes with less experienced artists, like, they can't even really communicate it. But I know from having conversations with the artist that I think that's where her head's going. So I'm kind of leaning into that. Like, I can kind of tell the more modern stuff, there's like drum intros and all this stuff. So like maybe that's where her head's going first, where the other like Stevie Nicks stuff, it seems like that kind of tight organic-y thing is what she's liking out of that. But then on the flip side of it, you get a Hosier tune that's got this big space. So it's like all these things can be related, and I can do certain things to kind of glue that together. So I have to take like that weird kind of vintagey drum sound into account, but also how could I make that work over here? Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like a wash, like, and a lot of these things I'm not moving because they're here, because I found they're good at that thing. Like, they can pull off a whole lot of different things. Like the Loudon mics, you can almost get them to sound like whatever you want because it's the source that's going to make that big difference. And with snares, like, we have a really good drummer coming in who's like good at every instrument, but whatever.
Isaac. He said you just got a Black Beauty.
Yeah, which may not work for this session actually, but like a whole lot of different snare choices. Like, we're gonna be tweaking that, probably song to song. So having a decent signal flow for our snare, if that's the common factor, then we go back to changing the source, and now the whole kit feels different. Like, we can put the dial tune, which is I just used that last week for like the Tool Deftones thing. They freaking loved it because it could do whatever we needed it to do. I could tune it super fast. If I then change that out for an Acrolite, holy cow. Now this is just changing the snare, nothing else, Not the mics, nothing else. The drummer's going to play different. One, like if you put our drummer coming in, Isaac, under it with that acrolite and just get that fat 70s sound, like they're going to play different. That does more for the overall tone than changing out the snare mic. We can still change out the snare mic, but it's like the starting point is kind of what I'm trying to at least nail 90% of. It's never perfect. Even the last session you came in on, I had Bobby, the same guitar player who's going to be here, and like in the first 10 minutes, I was like, I'm changing those guitar mics. It did not work.
Yeah.
Which was weird because it was the OC16. And I loved them on that other cab.
But it was a completely different set and setting.
Totally different sound.
Yeah.
And that was an instance where I got it wrong. So it'd be interesting if, like, on this, maybe we can flash forward and I could be like, yep, did it right, or no, here's what we changed.
I think that's an important aspect, too, if you have either a band coming in, or this is probably more likely with session players, but
yeah,
like your example of changing the snare is going to do a lot more for the player in the moment than changing the mic, because maybe they have some of that in their ears, but they're not playing to what you're hearing in the control room. They're playing to what they're hearing in front of them or in their ears, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And there's so much of that, like, with singers or like any really good instrumentalists who, I don't know, and I'm not trying to piss anybody off, but like the better musician you are and more in tune with your instrument, it becomes so much about touch and feel. And I can manipulate that based on like what I give you in your ears, even as a bass player. And like, that's some of the things you don't really talk about, but like, what do I give back the drummer in their ears? Sometimes it's just overheads because I want them to mix themselves a certain way. Or if they're not hitting the snare hard enough, I might turn that down. Like, even though they have their mixers here and they can mix their own stuff, on the drums, I have it set up so it's a stereo channel. So they're turning drums up or down. But if I turn the snare down, now I can get the drummer to hit a little harder and I didn't have to say a thing. So little things like that, I can kind of treat the band as an instrument. But that goes back to, if those players are really good, they're really in tune to how things feel. So there comes this whole like push-pull interaction with whatever you put up, and that's way more important than the mic choice in general. Is how do they react to what's in front of them? If that makes any sense. Did I say general again?
You said in general.
Guitar cabs. Let's go take a look. So he'll be using one of my amp heads, Killer Player. I'm going into my cabs here. So I'm going to have 2 cabs set up, and I have settled into this. I love this setup, and I haven't changed the mics in a while. The Austrian Audio 818s as, well, just on the Mesa all the time, ready to go. And the A8N13s, I need to get more of these because I love them on this cab, and they're also great everywhere else. I just use it as like 2 Christmas projects for a guitar. They're so good on guitar, like acoustic guitar. But I love them here. So we'll switch back and forth between cabs depending what we need. This one's much more like hi-fi. I think like the guitar's right here in your face. This will smooth anything out. Very dark, very smooth. I tend to think of it like rhythm lead, but that's not exactly how I use them. It has more to do with what guitar is in his hand, what type of part are we playing, how dirty is it. They're very different. And I don't think I've used the Weber or the Orange in like 3 years. So I should sell those.
But then you won't have them anymore.
I know. I don't want them anymore. I really just need those. Like, that covers all the bases that I could want from a guitar. And
those are guitar cabs, not bass cabs.
Well, I have one bass cab.
That you haven't used in a long time, right?
No, I use it all the time.
Oh, whenever you're reamping?
Yeah.
Okay.
It just sits there.
Yeah.
Because in a session like this, like, I mic'd up the cab for the band that was here this weekend, but in a session like this where there's so many players and we're miking guitar cabs and the singer has to be in the booth, I don't have another place to put a bass cab.
Used to. You had a room back there.
We actually can do that if we want. I don't know how loud it's going to be.
Yeah.
We could put traps around it, I suppose, but not high on the priority list because I know with you I can reamp it.
Yeah,
Like,
that's fine.
You're pretty consistent. I know how to react to you.
I'm at least personally curious on, is there a similar thought pattern if you're doing something like tambo or shaker or any other like extra percussion stuff in mic choice?
Very little.
Yeah, it's just whatever condenser is in there.
I normally like there's always one set up for the vocalist, and that's going to be in this room for this session. And if I don't know somebody, I don't know their voice, I typically put the Loudon Eden up. It's always here. The Eden, I get another Loudon mic. Like the whole thing, I view Loudon as like problem solving. And this one has 3 different circuits on it. I think right now we are set to, we're on neutral. So kind of a level playing field. This has like, it can go the very modern at this point. A C800 is vintage, but the sound of a C800G, typically people call it modern. Very bright, very forward. And then they can also do kind of like a blown out U47 type of thing. So you have this wide gamut of different things you can get with this mic, as well as the low pass on here. The low pass, with this microphone, you cannot think about the low pass as like, how much low end do I want in it? It's how much low end is the mic giving into the circuit, and therefore how much saturation is coming out of it. Like, you're not going to give more low end into a voice or less low end. It's lower than that. It has way more to do with the saturation buildup of this thing as a whole. So for that reason, you can put this on a super clean preamp and get a really interesting colored vocal sound. And the capsule's dumb heavy. It's thick. It's big.
That's what she said.
So it kind of acts as its own compressor in a way. So for those reasons, it's fantastic to put on a vocalist that I don't know very well, especially for a session like this. She's going to be in here singing while the band's playing, but these aren't the final vocals. This is like my audition to get to know her voice, so that when she comes in for the real session, is it this? Is it something else? I don't know, but this gets me at least in like 3 different mics, of worlds of mics, just flipping the switch on the back, so I can tilt her in a direction that works. And then from there, I can make a more educated decision. How did I get there based on your question? Tambo.
Yeah.
So, okay. So because this is set up, this is going to be the Tambo and Shaker mic. That's it.
Shaker mic. She don't even have a mic.
Oh, but speaking of bass cabs, this is where the cab was for the last session. The Clarion. Again, it's Loudon. This isn't a sponsor. We don't get sponsors on this channel yet. But yeah, that was already here. I didn't set that up. That is the best bass cab mic. My gosh. And I typically mic as far away from the cab as the speaker is large, and he had a 212. It was an Eden 212.
Yeah.
It sounded so good.
I want a 212 cab so bad.
The tweeter in that cab is, most of the time I hate tweeters. That one sounded really good. Really good. And like I hadn't messed with many Eden amps. Like that had he kept calling it the magic knob, where like, it was an enhance knob. Like it kind of it felt like it cut the mids and boosted the super low, super high.
That's what the knob on my bass does.
Oh.
Yeah, that's my magic knob, but it's on my bass instead of the cab. Yeah.
That's interesting. Most of the time I'm boosting more mids into bass.
Depends on what you're going for though. And that's on the very back end, right? But when you're going into the amp, if you scoop those mids and the source is less mid heavy.
That's a good point. But I always find I want like more 300 in basses. Why you guys hate 300?
Gross. Ew.
Nothing else does it. Nobody else is covering those bases.
Nice.
Should we talk about like miking position?
Sure. You want to get the set up and then we can do that?
Like generally set up the drums?
Nice.
Now I'm doing it on purpose. I can start. I mean, this stuff is going to move, so take this with a grain of salt, because once the drummer comes in, I'll remeasure. But what I would do, got my handy dandy tape measure. And basically I take a measurement from center of the snare to this guy and see what that is. I typically like these pretty high. Anything with a relatively tight pattern, you can kind of get the phasey thing. Like if they go for this left crash, you'll hear the higher you can get it away from the kit, the less that's going to happen, but also the less stereo picture you get. So there's a balance for sure. The measuring gets you knowing that, one, if you set your preamps the same, and if there's no issues in the signal chain, at least you know your snare should be in the middle, like dead center of the picture, barring other weird things. Like you could be the same distance, but maybe there's a cymbal blocking, so that's going to affect it. But phase-wise, you should be sitting pretty there. And every rule is meant to be broken. Sometimes that does not work, and you have a grouping of cymbals or something that kind of makes you move things a little bit. But that's, again, it's all about a starting point. So I like to measure, and I tend to sit between like 49 inches and 52 inches from the center of the snare. That's with these mics. That's what I like. Different mics, you'll see different things. And I can find I get a little closer if I have like the MA301s, for example, kind of like a U87-ish. Set those to figure 8. So they're picking up top and bottom. I drop them a little closer. And you get a little less phase out of the, I don't know why. It shouldn't be that different, but I like those a little lower. So I don't know, knowing and experimentation, I guess. But if we're going to start miking, whether this is a point of contention for a lot of people, some people don't want to mount anything on a drum ever. I would typically say that's correct, but I found these don't really dampen the drum. Again, it's Loudon. The mic is Loudon. This is Tom mic, and the mount is Loudon. This is their rim mount. I think it's $99. Super strong, very repeatable. It's great for session stuff. So for changing shells, I just mic'd it that quick. And it doesn't feel like it kind of kills the drum. And the beauty of it, like if I put the same one back on the same type of drum, I have the same miking setup. So with these, I kind of go center-ish drum. I'm kind of coming up over the rim, 2-3 fingers, center-ish point of attack. You can get a little more realistic the further over you're coming or giving it more room to breathe. But I find I kind of like it right about down for this mic. If this was like a DM20, like an Earthworks style mic, I tend to get those closer to the drum. I can go grab one, actually. Just showing different mics, I guess. So other like Tom choices. DM20s are great. Actually, KSM32s. Now these will kind of do the same thing of like how people will put like 414s on a Tom or that style of mic. This would be pretty much the same thing, but kind of show what I do here. And for this, you need a microphone that's good. It's decoupled. Any kind of shock absorbed capsule, and it needs high SPL tolerances unless you're doing like real light stuff on the drum. But if we're doing like a DM20, another one that attaches right to the rim, which I'm a big fan of. But with these, I tend to get them closer. So because these are marketed as not having a whole lot of bleed, but they have a ton of bleed. The bleed sounds great. Not like a 421 where there's a whole lot of bleed and the bleed sounds horrible. This is at least good sounding bleed. So if you have like a jazz kit, these are fantastic. And the goosenecks are just beasts. If it's a more modern, go goose. I get it. Okay. If it's a more modern thing, I'm trying to like mitigate bleed the best I can. So I would get this in between the cymbal and the drum. Like if this guy wasn't here. Trying to reject as much of the cymbal as I can. And again, this is all going to change. And point at the point of attack. Now there's a couple things. As soon as you get to a floor tom, if you're between cymbal and the center of the drum, but you're pointing at the snare, that's also something you have to kind of take into consideration, because a mic's going to pick up like what it sees, kind of. I mean, think of it like you're shining a flashlight on something. So like I can really get the sound of the drum by looking straight down at the drum. But if you think about this as light, if I kind of come from the side and cast my light kind of across there, I get the point of attack. I get the sound of the shell because I'm physically closer. That's where you kind of get into like, I'm using the polar pattern of the mic itself, as well as the proximity effect of how much low end are we picking up. How can I use that to manipulate like the attack? Because if I'm super duper close, we're going to get a ton of low end here, but it's going to sound really bad on this mic. Whereas, I guess I should say where these do shine, if you have a session that you can really pull back on these and not worry about bleed, they sound so good. Like jazz, anything that's open, you don't have to worry about gating. Like, they're great. If you want kind of that more like C414, like country session, and again, hundreds of people are going to totally disagree with what I'm about to say, but the large condenser microphone coming across against a tom, like that big fat country tom thing, I like the 32s for that. Sub in C414, sub in whatever, U67 if you got money. You can even have these on their own little like swivel mount. It's going to be hard to do with the shock mount in this situation, like getting them to not hit the rim. But what I really like to do is get them real close like this and then kind of tilt them out. Like the slap on these things just sounds so good. And the low end is enormous. I love 32s. That was a long time talking about toms, wasn't it? So, snare, it's basically the same idea. With snare, you have the added consideration of having a super loud cymbal right next to it that's more abrasive and sharing more frequencies with itself. So, getting in, knowing how your microphone rejects, and like the rear-ish portion here is going to reject the most. And obviously, the closer I can get to the source, the more I'm going to hear it versus anything around it. So, with proximity, you're also going to get more low end. That may be exactly what you want. It may not be what you want. The most natural sound you're going to get is like kind of further away, pointed across, generally to the point of attack. What you'll see a lot of like rock or metal doing is getting real close to that rim and shooting across. You just get so much impact this way. So I kind of like to split the difference. Just a general taste. Forming an army. For something like this, I can hear the sound of the drum really, really well. I hear ghost notes really well. I'm kind of blocking the hi-hat, and again, this is going to move because when the drummer gets here, he's going to get comfortable. And then as far as hearing like stick noise, I'm close enough that I hear a lot of it. Bottom snare, I don't really care. Just put it up. Generally, I say it a lot. Now that oh man. I kind of mirror what's happening on top with the bottom. I don't think about it too much. It is what it is. Hi-hat. I don't know how much I can speak to hi-hat because I feel like it's the thing I'm most frustrated with all the time. Finding a hi-hat sound that I like and I actually use, but I have really liked using this in my Gefell. a condenser, or like a SM7B works really well. RE20 works really well, but kind of pointing away at it tends to be the move for me. I don't know. That's how I've kind of settled into it recently. That may change in a week. Acoustic. So picture a player sitting here. This is typically where our guitar player sits. We'll just precariously set this here. How stable is this?
Pretty stable.
Enough. We'll use this as an example. So this is the Soyuz 17. This is going to be a massive acoustic sound, and this may not be right. This is why I have the M160 set out, which I'm probably going to switch to once I hear the band and how that sounds and what we want out of the acoustic. This is the easiest thing to change, so if I have something ready to go, we can do that. But I'm going to have the player sit in a comfortable position because I don't want them to move to the mic. I want to move the mic to them. Anything to get them wherever they're the most comfortable playing, because that's how you're going to get the best performance. So this is really awkward, but how I would approach this, not knowing a guitar, my starting point, again, these are all starting points, because there's 1,001 ways to mic an acoustic guitar, but a starting point, I'm going to look at between the 12th and 15th fret. That's kind of my starting point. And about a foot off. This is a little high right now because the player would be holding it a little higher. But I'm going to go like, I'm actually going to look down the barrel of the microphone and see and make sure I'm lined up to about right here. And that comes from a place of just kind of knowing what microphones are going to do where you move them. Up here, you're going to get more attack. The further back, you're going to get kind of a more even sound of the instrument, and the further back towards the sound hole you go, the darker you're going to get. So having that as a starting point, at least you know the palette of where you can move things really quickly. And even if I come in here, I'm like, no, that's not the sound. Sometimes all I do is like that much, like 3 inches, and it sounds great. 3 inches makes a big difference.
No.
Wow. And the difference between the 017, this is a FET condenser, and the M160, this is a dual element ribbon. A lot darker, a lot more intimate. The transients are going to be really fast here. Not that they're particularly slow there, but ribbons, it feels like it's instant. It's a very different feel. It's darker, so it can kind of tilt more vintagey or warmer. All the buzzwords. So we'll have it ready to go. The other thing to think about with a session like this, if you're running a large session with a lot of people, is talkbacks. Because the one thing you don't want to do is have people shouting all the time. And unfortunately, the drummer, they're surrounded by mics. I typically don't give the drummer a talkback, but everybody else is going to get one. Especially our keyboard player, who most often kind of becomes our session leader, not for any other reason than that's just kind of what happens. But having people be able to communicate during the session is huge. So I will typically slap up like these 308s. This is overkill for a talkback. I mean, literally put up the cheapest piece of crap you can find. That's what you want. Like you want anything else that can contribute to tone, you want to use it for the session. But in this instance, I'm not using all of my 308s. And the benefit here is they're laser focused. So if he's facing the kit and I put this on him, like I don't hear the drum set if he talks into this. That's the benefit with using this for talkbacks. Way too expensive, but I have it. So that's the thought process there.
I want to use the R88 for my talkback.
Sure. You'll hear everything.
Good.
Just as much as why not the R44? We can just use
That works too.
Most beautiful talkback you'll ever use.
Well, I need to be able to see around the mic too.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the reason I'm doing that is because he will talk during the song. So I want something where he can be very quiet, but everybody can still hear him. So that mic is laser focused.
Do you know if we're going to be able to do a fly on the wall of this session?
I think so. We could try.
Yeah. That would be cool to be able to link them of here's the setup and here's like the fly on the wall of the session.
Yeah, I'm sure we can. I can talk to her and get official permission. There's the thought process on the setup and like how I got from what the songwriter's giving me, the references, to like getting the mics out here. The next steps are getting the DAW set up, line checks. Before the band gets here, I mean, the levels are kind of whatever. As long as there's signal, it works. And that's as easy as using Jump and like I'll remote into my computer in there and walk around and literally tap microphones and make sure I have signal. That's as far as I go. If you guys want a video on preamp choice and stuff, let us know.
We could even talk about some of that if we do a fly on the wall one.
Yeah, I mean, if there is, here we can do. If you want to see this in actual practice, we put a fly on the wall video on my channel, and you can find out if some of my judgments were correct or not. So go check that out.